Hello, and welcome to the Sonic Fruit Film Podcast, where we aim to celebrate movies through the simple act of talking about our favourites. I'm Bennet Maples, and today I'm joined by the indisputable Imogen Church, writer and voice talent, and the undeniable Carl Cole, composer and Sonic Fruit's resident Foley artist. In this episode, we're discussing Pan's Labyrinth, which did not feature a pipe-playing behooved Bowie as we'd expected, but still is a cracking movie.
That was beautiful.
Now, I'm going to start in the interest of openness and honesty and say that the three of us did assemble a few weeks ago and attempted to do this one, and some of us hadn't watched the film.
For a while.
Yeah.
When you say some of us, you mean you and me?
Yeah,
Bennet?
I do, yeah.
Carl watched it.
Yeah.
I did.
Did loads of research.
Yeah. So we've given him time to forget that.
Yeah. And
now we've watched it. So we're gonna sound like we know what we're talking about. But it turned out for this film that it mattered.
It did.
Because it's an odd one.
We couldn't wing it.
No, it's
I
think it's a great film. It's probably one of my favourite films of all time.
Absolutely one of my favourite films ever.
And it's tricky to say why, because it's got oddnesses that shouldn't work, and probably in the hands of other people wouldn't have worked.
Tragic fairy tale.
Tragic fairy tale.
Yeah.
Horror. It's got aspects of horror, and yet magical realism.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's I love horror and I love fantasy and fairy tales. So for me, it's just pretty much the perfect film. It's also got my absolute favourite line of all time, when Mercedes, I can speak a little Spanish, so I will correct you on your names.
Please do.
When Mercedes says, "You won't be the first pig I've gutted," and then she gives him a half Chelsea smile. That's one of my favourite moments in the whole film.
Okay.
Tells us a lot about you.
Yeah, we've got Imogen sized up on this
They're
one.
both looking a bit nervous now. They're both fidgeting, looking a bit nervous.
Of all of the rich imagery that you could have picked from in this wonderful film, you chose that.
I did.
Scene in a shed where she cuts him in the face.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. But it's because he's such a
He
good
is
villain.
Absolutely amazing. From the
Vidal?
first...
Is it Vidal?
Vidal, yeah. From the first moment, I thought it was interesting rewatching it, trying to pick up kind of the little key points, and the script is so tight. I couldn't find any kind of flab in it at all. Every single moment seemed relevant to pushing the story forward. The first time she steps out of the car to meet him, and she puts out her hand to shake his hand instead of calling him father, and he grabs her hand and just clenches it. And I was like, wow, you're not beating around the bush at all. We know straight off the bat that this guy is a complete arsehole.
But again, as you say, beautifully done. Because I'm just going to take it back to what I was saying. It kind of shouldn't work. He's quite a sort of pantomime villain, isn't he? As you say, from the out, he's the bad guy, and you're going to know that he's the bad guy. But yet, it's just brilliantly balanced.
Something I noticed, I've seen it a lot, but I hadn't watched it for a period of time until I watched it 2 days ago. It was the first time I noticed there is actually this little side to him that's kind of in there to humanise him, which is to do with his dad's watch.
Yeah.
And it kind of made sense for the first time when he pretends to slice his throat in the mirror, and the fact he's obsessed with this watch that his dad smashed as an example to his son of a great way to die. And actually...
He truly believes in the path he's on.
I think really wants to die. Really wants to die in glory.
I think that's what makes him more frightening. Isn't it? Because he's not only a villain, he's a villain with a purpose.
Yes,
and that's quite a worrying aspect, I think.
But maybe that helps the pantomime villain status, because it does add that. I don't know. I want to call it a human characteristic because it is. I mean, for a psychopath. Yeah. As opposed to it just being Cruella de Vil, he's got that aspect where you know that actually his dad left him this legacy that he can never live up to. The only way to live up to it is to die, which is awful.
I think with the talk of pantomime villains, I think it's worth pointing out the scene where he caves a man's head in with a bottle. And I think any kind of sense that he's a pantomime villain...
that I wouldn't be able to cope with, but there are, 2, 3 moments of visceral violence, really horrific violence, and that's really it.
And that pulls him out of that pantomime status. Because all of a sudden, it's shocking. It's an incredibly shocking scene. In otherwise it's been, the pace has been, it's dark up until then.
Yeah.
But I think for me, that point in the movie, it took a turn.
That's
and
where
I
the
realised,
extremes are gonna be.
God, this guy is truly unhinged. So,
I think it's interesting you mentioned the watch as well. I hadn't picked up before when I watched it, but I thought this time he's locked into time where she isn't. She lives in this timeless world, and in fact, not to skip to the spoiler endings straight away, but she isn't going to, her existence isn't tied into her mortal existence at all, whereas his very much is. And actually, I think this was an IMDb trivia, but if you look, Vidal's office, the main room that they feature him in, is the inside of his watch.
What?
There's cogs and things it's amazing. And I hadn't noticed that before either. But
wow.
I did notice
he lives
recurring
in time. He's locked in.
Circular imagery in windows and the lamps, which I suppose could be, could reference the clock face, but that's some deep shit.
But
Bennet.
Del Toro's detail, I mean, that's
astonishing.
just a pointer, but it's just
ridiculous.
extraordinary. And I think probably there's a million things that I miss, but it's in there at every level. It's amazing.
Well, there's people have drawn comparisons as well between Vidal's room and the cave of the monster. The eyeless.
Yeah.
There's a name the internet have given him which escapes me at the minute. But the monster that puts his eyes in his hands.
I think he's the Pale Man, isn't he?
The Pale Man, that's right. Yeah. And if you look at the layout of Vidal's office and the layout of the banquet room, they're very, very similar with the way that the banquet is set up and the fire in the background behind his chair and things like that. Lots of parallels there.
Interesting.
Should we just go back and watch it again?
Yeah.
What we need to do is a blow-by-blow account of everything that happens in the film, in case anyone hasn't seen it.
Tiny moment. Well, one thing that interests me is that, again, this is one of my favourite films ever. How did he get it so right here and so wrong elsewhere?
Where's the elsewhere you're talking about?
I think if you don't know, you need to go and watch.
I don't not like any of his films, but I don't think any of them come up to this standard. I do think this is a unique film, for him. I mean, I think when you watch the others, you can go, okay, this is the guy that should make Pan's Labyrinth.
Yeah.
But still, I struggle when I'm watching it to just go, what is it about this? It's so good over his other work, because there's still elements of sort of puppetry about it, and there's still elements of all that stuff that he does in camera, which is lovely and I'm a big fan of, but it's still very tactile and you can still feel the filmmaking process. But somehow in this film it only adds to the film, it doesn't detract from it. As I'm saying that, I wonder whether it's because all of that stuff is in the fairy tale world and there are these two worlds, and part of that paradox is quite nice, that the post sort of Civil War reality is much more natural, much more straight drama, and then actually set against the sort of slightly puppetry aspect, it feels like that helps it become a different world.
Well, it has everything, doesn't it, as a film? It's a war film. It's set in the Civil War. It's steeped in political commentary as well, in terms of the way it displays fascism. And
even the characters in the fantasy world, like the toad sitting under the tree, eating up all the insects, getting fat on the tree while it's killing it.
Exactly. And I think there's so many aspects to this film. Obviously, there's the fairy tale element, the fantasy element there as well, which all come together seamlessly. You don't question it for a minute. You don't. It doesn't feel disjointed in any way. The storytelling is so good. And that's just for a number of factors, really. But he really did capture lightning in a bottle with this film, I think.
And that aspect, I think, what you were just saying there, the aspect that it could be in her head is, again, could be really badly handled. It could be it could have been very cheesy. She's in this world, so she's escaping to her books because she loves her books. And as you say, it doesn't feel like that. It feels real. It feels like the transition of her seeing a fairy and the fairy taking her into this fairy land, even though the fairy actually is just a weird winged thing.
Well, it's that thing like the adults choose not to see the fairy tale. I think there's the bit where she puts the mandrake root under the bed.
Yeah.
And I was desperately looking to see if it resembled the kind of animated puppet that you see under the bed when he pulls it out. And it looks close enough. And they do it so well that he could just ignore it. Mm. So whether it's real or not is not really it.
It might just happen to be a root that looks like it's got a face in it, but we've seen those.
It still keeps that question
open,
which is magical.
Yeah,
it really helps the film bob along a little bit. So
I also quite like the dark Alice aspect to it. When she gets dressed up in her fabulous green dress with the white pinafore and the green bow, and she comes down, she looks just like Alice from Alice in Wonderland. Mm-hmm. And then she goes over to the tree, and instead of going down the rabbit hole, she goes down into the tree. But obviously the outcome is entirely different. And there's also that added aspect of, it's kind of a fantasy, but the world she's living in is so dark and hideous that she can't maintain the same kind of Alice in Wonderland level of cleanliness, of fantasy, because she comes out caked in mud and shivering, and her dress is torn or covered in mud or whatever, and she cannot... It's like seeing Alice in Wonderland going into a really, really bad place. Not just, the Queen and the piggy and stuff like that, but a really, really dark place, and not managing to get herself out of it, which made me so sad. It makes me so sad, that film, in so many ways.
Let's talk about the soundscape of it.
Yeah.
Soundtrack, I think, is also really interesting because it's quite sparse, isn't it?
I'll let Imogen pronounce the composer's name. It's Javier.
I'll tell you in a minute.
Javier Navarrete.
Mm-hmm.
But she'll do the proper pronunciation in a moment.
Sure.
It's fascinating score. Incredibly rich in terms of orchestration. Very classical European roots to it. More akin to nothing like a Hollywood score at all, which is really, really interesting, because I believe that the director's used this composer for all of his Spanish-speaking films, but none of his Hollywood films.
Okay.
So that's just an interesting turn. But it's
because there was quite a lot of pressure on him to do this in English.
Was there?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he was offered more money to do it in English, and he turned it down because he said it had to be in Spanish.
I think the film is better for it.
Absolutely,
it stands up
absolutely.
in a better way, and they probably wouldn't have got some of the actors that they got. It's fine as it is. You wouldn't need to do it any other way.
Well, absolutely. Now it's made, and it's this good. You have to say, well, any decision that was made correctly. But I thought it was interesting that.
So, Carl, what did you think of Javier Navarrete's music?
I found it's wonderful. It's quite heavy in terms of emotional content at times, which is a good thing because of the nature of the subject matter of the film.
Some of the emotional content is quite heavy.
But it runs this childlike theme throughout the whole thing, which is the lullaby, essentially, and all themes seem to kind of branch off of that as well. A really, really string-laden score. What I found really, really interesting about the score is that when I was researching this film before, it was talking about how this film sits into the rule of threes within fairy tales. And then as I looked at the score again, I realised that the actual theme is based in 3, and there's 3 bars of 3 to make the theme happen. I thought,
love it.
That's got to be a conscious decision there. Yeah. The main theme runs 3 bars of 3, and I just thought that must be something there, because there's so many elements of the film within the plot that run in 3s. Maybe the composer's taken that on board from the director and run with it a little bit. But it is beautiful. The melody is very,
doesn't
very
feel like
beautiful.
anything in this film is accidental, does it?
No.
I thought, because interestingly, I was listening to the soundscape in general, and thought actually there's places where the sound effects sound a little bit sort of hyper real. They sound a little bit like you wouldn't have put that sound. It sounds like you recorded it in a booth. Or, but actually, the more I got into it, the more I realised that also sets that bar of what's real and what's not real. So sometimes even in the real world, you've got sounds that are slightly kind of too edited and slightly too produced. But I think it really enhances that sense of not knowing what's real and what's in her head, and yeah, it's great.
Yeah, picking up on the fairy tale thing again. I'd just like to point out I have a master's degree in children's literature. Another thing I find interesting is that there's this kind of common idea that fairy tales are very sweet, and they're not, and they never were. And the original, even the original Grimm's tales that were published were massively sanitised compared to the versions that were passed down orally, through families and sitting around the fire and telling hideous tales. For example, Cinderella, one of the original early versions of Cinderella was called Donkey Skin. And she basically ran away under a donkey skin pretending to be a donkey because her own father was trying to have sex with her. So fairy tales essentially began in this very, very dark place, which I think is perfect for Pan's Labyrinth because to me, that's what a fairy tale should be. It should have that aspect of genuine peril and horror, because reading the earliest stuff you can read, that's what they're based in. And then Charles Perrault in the whatever he is in France decided to sanitise it and make it worthy for court, but that's another subject.
Well, the cautionary tales, aren't they?
Yeah.
The ways that you would maybe steer your children onto the right path. And it does feel like perhaps Pan's Labyrinth is that as well, in terms of the way it deals with fascism and the kind of the plight of people.
Yeah, absolutely.
It feels like it's a warning.
And the first casualty of war is innocence, which is, I think, one of the big themes of it. And despite the ending, I don't know if we discussed whether we would talk about the ending or not. Maybe we don't. Despite what happens at the end,
we haven't ever declared that these are all spoilers. These podcasts. So,
we have.
Yeah.
Okay.
We should.
Despite the fact that Ophelia dies. Which is... What? She dies? Despite the fact she dies, the little baby brother lives. And that's just this tiny little bit, in the gorilla group. Even if it's just in this one tiny corner, triumph at that moment. And that's the little lift you need, I think. I'm not sure I could have coped if it hadn't had that.
She does die to
end.
allow her to go over to the other side and fulfill her destiny and be who she wasn't meant to be in the mortal world for long.
And
anyway.
also, obviously, Vidal gets the best ending ever. Yeah. Tell my son. No.
Yeah, I think it's a great ending to a great villain. For him, I was going to say they go hand in hand, don't they? I think they cut between. Do they cut between each other?
Yeah.
As her ending is unfolding, so is his, and I think that's a really, really lovely way to bring both their stories to an end. And because it's the last thing he'd want as well. It's almost like you're stripping him of all his pride and all his kind of everything he wanted happened in regards to the watch and everything else is taken away from him. So
that's what I was saying earlier. I feel like he has this fatalistic destiny to die young with a small son so that he can repeat what his father essentially left him as his legacy, which is you must die young and a hero in a really exciting way, and your son will hear all these... Oh, no.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautifully done.
Which is really nice. I was just thinking about what were your feelings about Ophelia's mother in terms of the story? I just thought she was a really...
An interesting question, Imogen.
Thanks, Bennet.
Maybe you could have asked us this before we before we decided to record.
Feels like something we should have an opinion on. You're right.
I was watching it and I was feeling that essentially, if her mother hadn't gone off with Vidal, she would not be in this place, she wouldn't be in this mess, she wouldn't die. But then the mum has he's a psychopath who puts their child in the way of a psychopath and then makes a child with a psychopath. But then there's this really touching little moment where they're lying in bed together and Carmen asks Ophelia if she's scared and she says yes. And she says she wants to leave, and then Carmen talks about the fact that it's been so hard and she's been so lonely. And I almost felt like there was a whole nother film there in terms of what she'd been through.
Yeah.
As clearly, quite a poor
Yeah.
person with a tailor for a husband.
Yeah.
We don't know how the husband died.
I thought she was a very interesting character. She's not on screen an awful lot, is
No.
she? You'd think she's going to be like quite a key character, and she's not. I mean, the femininity of the film is very much represented by Ophelia.
And Mercedes, come on.
Yeah, sure. But yeah, I mean, Mercedes is much more of the strong mother figure.
Yeah.
That you
well,
want,
that's
that you
interesting,
want
isn't
her
it?
mother
Because
to
she
be.
becomes her mother figure in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
She's there cuddling her and saying, I'm going to look after you, I'm going to come back for you, and she does.
Yeah.
Because she's a strong
Yeah.
woman, isn't she?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's the thing. And between the three of them, between Vidal and Ophelia, and the mother, the mother gets overshadowed.
Oh, totally.
Character-wise, very much by Ophelia and Vidal.
Yeah.
Kind of intentionally as well. I think it's not. She's a
that's not
lesser
flaw in
character.
it.
Yeah, she's a lesser character.
But
in this
also
story.
another way to show how Vidal has no respect for human life. She's an real inconvenience to Vidal. If she hadn't been there, again, none of that would have happened.
No,
Carmen,
she'd
who
been at
is
home somewhere.
a poor, beautiful woman who he's clearly plucked to give him a son, would undoubtedly die in childbirth, and then he's fine. He's got his heir. But this little stepdaughter who comes along, and even though she's only, I don't know what age she's supposed to be, maybe 9?
I think
younger.
the original script she was supposed to be, I think, 8 or 9.
Yeah.
And he rewrote it for her to be. I think she's supposed to be sort of 10 or 11.
She's a bit older, isn't she? Yeah. But this
because he just
small,
he's taken with her.
small girl, if you can look at it in that way, this small girl just cocks everything up. I mean, she is the little wasp that gets into the car, stings someone, and there's a massive car crash where hundreds of people die. She's this tiny little element that upsets the balance entirely and leads to most of the fascists dying, and quite a few of the guerrillas as well. And I think, in a way, that's wonderful, because that tells us that a 10-year-old girl can be so powerful. Even if it's not consciously.
Yeah.
But it was through her stubbornness. I mean, it starts when she gets out of the car and refuses to call him father. And that's really the end. That's his demise. And we've talked about what a psychopath he is, and what unhinged, brutal, murdering character he is. And essentially, he's brought down by a 10-year-old girl, which I think is brilliant.
Absolutely.
Worth mentioning something here is that even though it's called Pan's Labyrinth, it's not Pan.
It's
No.
not, is it?
It's not Pan.
It's really
a
not
It's
faun.
not called
Pan.
Pan's Labyrinth
Yeah.
in Spanish.
No, it's
The Labyrinth of the Faun.
yes.
Yeah.
So I feel
So
it's a
where did-
minor detail, but someone didn't really hit
I'm
the
just-
nail on the head
yeah.
when it came to translating over.
Because Pan is a very different... I mean, Pan's a very young...
Quite a specific character.
Yeah.
Yes,
A
kind of...
unique. Whereas a
Yeah.
faun is a mythical species
Yeah.
of creatures. Pan is a unique being.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I wonder... I mean, other than that, the subtitles seemed really good to me. So I'd be really interesting... I'd be really interesting? I
You
wish.
are really interesting, Imogen.
The subtitles seemed great to me. You know how sometimes you watch a subtitled film and you think, oh, I didn't quite hit the mark, or
I
that
think he
wasn't
wrote
quite
them.
right. That would explain it. So he must have made the decision.
I think he was very
on
unhappy with
Pan's
the
Labyrinth,
Devil's Backbone,
which we haven't
translation.
talked about, but which I love. as well.
Yeah, I think the subtitles on that apparently he was very unhappy with, so he insisted on writing the subtitles for this one.
So, Guillermo, wherever you are, please tell us why you called it Pan's Labyrinth. I'm just interested, that's all.
I think I might have read something about this. I think ultimately it was just a marketing thing. I think they just felt that we wouldn't understand what a faun was necessarily, whereas Pan was,
But he
familiar
is,
enough.
as I'm sure you two know, he is a musician. Pan?
I didn't know that.
Oh, didn't you?
Pan.
Pan.
Yeah.
Pan! No, not Guillermo! Not
Well, he might be.
Guillermo, you might be. I don't want to missell you. But yeah, flute. That was it. He's a
I feel
flautist.
Guillermo's in some dark rock band.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
He's
Some
a
sort
death
of
metal guitarist, isn't he?
Death metal, yeah.
I don't
That'd be awesome. The Pans. Yeah. I'm just on Wikipedia. So Pan is the god of the wild, shepherds and flocks, and the nature of mountain wilds and rustic music, and companion to the nymphs. I mean, there's something in there.
So don't be put off by the title, is what we're saying.
No, I was going to say, you could kind of, there's mountainous, and perhaps it's to do... Oh, I don't know. Or maybe I'm just looking too much into it, and it literally was just something they could call it, that people would go, "Oh, right, pan, yeah." But whatever reason, it's gone into the realm of legend to me.
Indeed. You should all watch it. Which leaves me to say thank you to Imogen and Carl for joining me, and thank you to you for listening. Don't forget that you can email us at podcast@sonicfruit.co.uk, or you can tweet at us via @sonic_fruit. The Sonic Fruit Film Podcast is produced by Sonic Fruit, with music by Carl Cole and engineering by Jake Kenny and Jordan Brett. For more information, check out sonicfruit.co.uk.
Did you record it, Bennet?
That's a good question. I think I did. I did actually look over your shoulder at one point.
I'd love it if we had to do this a third time, because that would fit so well.